Have you ever met someone who made you feel watched? Not in the obvious sense, not in the way that eyes glare or linger too long, but in the way silence hovers. Not quite cold, not quite warm, just hollow. The way they nod as you speak, like they're present, like they're listening, and yet something in you begins to question whether you're speaking to anyone at all. There are people like that. People who master the art of presence, without ever truly showing up. You feel it in your gut, long before your mind can explain it. Something doesn't add up. Something flickers behind the eyes, behind the politeness, behind the well-rehearsed laughter. Jung warned us that the most dangerous people are not those who commit obvious harm. They are the ones who are never questioned. The ones who wear perfection like a second skin until even they forget it's not their own. They speak with gentle authority. They smile like they've practiced it. They listen without interrupting. And yet, you leave feeling smaller, drained, disoriented. They didn't insult you. They didn't correct you. But something in you feels erased, subtly, expertly. These are the ones who haven't just buried their shadow. They've built a cathedral over it, and the bells still ring every time they speak. You wonder if they mean well. You wonder if the coldness you feel is your imagination. You start to question your instincts. That's how it begins. Because when someone's persona is so polished, so untouchable, your nervous system starts to assume you must be the flawed one. You become more agreeable, more careful with your words, more willing to bend, to stay in their glow. But their glow is not warmth, it's spotlight. And eventually, it burns. Jung knew the signs. He saw the masks people wore not out of malice, but out of necessity. He understood that when we are not allowed to be real, we become rehearsed. And when we are rehearsed for too long, we forget that we were ever improvising. The danger is not in deception. The danger is in forgetting it was ever a lie. Imagine a child who learned early that anger was not allowed, that sadness made others uncomfortable, that curiosity was dangerous. What becomes of that child? They become palatable. They become pleasing. They become safe. But inside, the exiled parts grow teeth. And one day, that same child, now grown, walks into a room with the calm of a monk, the smile of a saint, and a shadow that could devour you whole. Because the more you suppress, the more you project. The more you polish, the more you deceive, not others, but yourself. Jung called this the great inversion, the turning inward of everything we fear, until it leaks outward through our tone, our gaze, our presence, not with noise, but with absence. A silence so perfected it becomes predatory. Have you ever been in a conversation that left you feeling like a ghost? Like you were never really there? That's not just poor listening. That's contact with someone who has abandoned their own interiority. And when someone has abandoned themselves, they will eventually abandon you too. Not with cruelty, with quiet, with disappearing while standing right in front of you. You see, the most dangerous person is not the angry one. It's the one who never gets angry. The one who never trembles, never stumbles, never forgets what mask they're wearing. The one who's been wearing it for so long, it has fused to their skin. And they speak of love, of compassion, of light, while exiling everything in them that isn't beautiful. But light that refuses shadow is not illumination, it is erasure. We are not meant to be whole through purity. We are meant to be whole through complexity. And the moment someone stops being willing to look at their own contradictions, they start becoming a danger. To you, to themselves, to truth. Because they will start seeing their own shadow in you. And they will attack it. Softly, quietly, elegantly. You'll notice it in the way they misunderstand your words. In the way they assign motives you never had. In the way they turn your discomfort into your fault. You won't have proof. You won't be able to point to a single moment. But your soul will start shrinking when they enter the room. Because something in them needs you to carry what they refuse to touch. You become the vessel for their disowned emotions. You become the traitor, the villain, the impure one. Not because you are, but because they must remain innocent. That's how projection works. And no one projects more fiercely than the one who thinks they have nothing to hide. You start explaining yourself. You start doubting yourself. You start rehearsing conversations before you speak to them. That's not friendship. That's not intimacy. That's psychological warfare without bullets. Jung warned us, the greater the light, the darker the shadow. And the shadow that is never looked at becomes mythic, archetypal, possessive. It becomes not just a part of the person, it becomes the person. And suddenly, they're no longer speaking. The archetype is. The savior, the victim, the martyr, the prophet. They don't have conversations. They deliver sermons. They don't ask questions. They declare truths, and they don't see you. They see their own narrative, reflected back with perfect certainty. This is not madness. This is not evil. This is blindness wearing the robes of clarity. And it is dangerous. Because the moment someone believes they are above reflection, they lose the capacity to relate. And relating is what keeps us human, what keeps us soft, what keeps us from becoming a storm in human skin. There is a kind of silence that heals, the kind you feel beside someone who doesn't need you to perform, who doesn't flinch when you pause too long, who doesn't fill the space with words, but with presence. Then there is the other kind of silence, the silence that follows a sentence you didn't know was a trigger. The silence that falls over a room like fog after you've revealed something too real, too raw, too unfiltered. With certain people, your truth feels like a trespass. And that's when you know. You're no longer speaking to someone who can hold contradiction. You're speaking to someone who has built a fortress out of their persona. You say something vulnerable, and instead of warmth, you feel the chill of judgment, not in words, but in the sudden stillness. The withdrawal behind the eyes. You are not safe here, not because they will hurt you, but because they will unsee you, edit you, reduce you to what fits their reflection. Carl Jung saw this not as moral failure, but as fragmentation. When a person refuses to see certain parts of themselves, rage, envy, grief, fear, they don't disappear. They disperse. They leak. And eventually, they return. In dreams, in obsessions, in the way they cannot stop talking about other people's flaws, in the way they moralize everything except their own behavior. You'll know you've met someone like this when everything feels a little too correct, a little too clean. Like they've bleached their soul for presentation. And yet, your stomach twists when they speak. Because your body doesn't believe them. You are not reacting to their words. You are reacting to their absence. The parts they've lost, the weight they carry in others' backs, the stories they need you to play out so they don't have to. They smile when they should, laugh on cue, show concern like a perfectly tuned instrument, but none of it lands, because the human isn't there anymore, only the mask. Jung called this being possessed by the persona. When the role you play becomes so convincing, even you start believing it's who you are. But there's a cost. You lose spontaneity. You lose the trembling beauty of contradiction. You lose access to the voice inside that says, this isn't real. Because you've buried that voice beneath years of performance. And once the real self is buried, the shadow rules. The dangerous person is not the one who struggles with darkness. It is the one who thinks they have none. Because they will create enemies where there are none. They will find betrayal in honesty, weakness in openness, offense in difference. They don't need evidence. They just need a feeling. A twitch in the gut they mistake for truth. And suddenly you've done something wrong, but no one can name what it is. You've become the placeholder for a memory that isn't yours, a sin that didn't originate with you. And trying to explain yourself only makes it worse, because to confront the false narrative is to challenge their identity. And identity, when built on illusion, must be defended at all costs. So they gaslight. Quietly, elegantly. They question your tone, your intentions, your honesty. Not to find clarity, but to restore the balance of their illusion. Jung taught us that the psyche does not care about facts. It cares about survival. And if someone's survival depends on seeing themselves as pure, enlightened, righteous, then they will cast every uncomfortable truth onto someone else, including you. You will carry what they refuse to claim, until you learn to put it down, until you recognize this confusion is not yours, this heaviness is not your weight to bear, and this narrative you're caught in is not your story. It is theirs, unspoken, unexamined, unhealed, and unless they choose to see it, it will keep writing over the lives of others. You see, when someone cannot look within, they will search for themselves in others, but not the self that loves, the self that was broken, the self they could not grieve, the self they locked away because it was too painful to name. And if you happen to resemble that shadow, you become its target. Even if all you offered was truth, even if all you showed was love, it doesn't matter, because the story is older than you, and unless they wake up from it, they will keep using people as mirrors, as weapons, as bandages. Carl Jung warned us not to hate these people. He said the shadow is not evil, it is simply unconscious. But unconsciousness is what makes it dangerous, especially when wrapped in goodness, especially when delivered with grace. Because what we do not suspect, we do not defend against, and so we are wounded, not by fangs, but by smiles, not by monsters, but by those who still believe they are saints. There is a loneliness in those who seem to have everything figured out, a silence that hums beneath their confidence, beneath their eloquence, beneath their unwavering beliefs. It is the silence of disconnection, not from others, but from themselves. They speak of peace, but their words carry tension. They speak of light, but their gaze flickers like a candle running out of air. You sense the fracture, not in what they say, but in how they say it. Not in their logic, but in their lack of doubt. Because doubt, real, quiet, trembling doubt, is the birthplace of wisdom. And they left that place long ago. Jung saw it in patients who came to him not with obvious symptoms, but with lives that felt uninhabited. Men who spoke in philosophical maxims, women who smiled through stories of childhood terror. They had mastered the external, careers, families, appearances, but had become strangers to the voice inside. And when you no longer recognize your own inner world, you begin to treat the outer world like a stage. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every disagreement a threat. Every mirror a battlefield. Because somewhere along the way, they confused being good with being seen. And in the pursuit of being seen, they forgot how to feel. They feel only what is appropriate, only what has been rehearsed, only what does not disrupt the image. And so when grief comes, they say all the right words, but never cry. When anger rises, they breathe it out, but never let it move through their hands. When joy visits, they smile, but the laugh never reaches their eyes. This is the slow starvation of the soul, to live in the image of a life instead of the life itself. And eventually, something in the body revolts. The nervous system begins to fray. Insomnia, fatigue, panic. The body starts screaming what the soul has been whispering for years. You are not home. And when this person speaks about justice, about peace, about love, you find yourself agreeing with their ideas, but doubting their presence. Because truth without embodiment is hollow. It's air dressed as fire. Jung called this the danger of inflation. When a person merges with an archetype so fully, they become less than human and more than human at once. Less human because they have no access to vulnerability. More than human because they now speak as if from some throne above contradiction. They are the healer, the prophet, the awakened one. They are never tired, never confused, never in need. And yet, their gaze betrays them. Because you can only hide from your shadow for so long. Eventually, it begins to look back at you through the eyes of the people you meet. You see it in the friend who triggers you, in the stranger who irritates you, in the partner who asks you to slow down. And if you are unwilling to see it, you will blame them. You will turn discomfort into danger, challenge into betrayal, truth into attack. This is why the most dangerous people are often not those who hate you, but those who need you to play a role in their unconscious theater. and they will cast you without your consent. You will be the villain. You will be the one who failed them, not because you did anything wrong, but because their script required someone to carry the shame they buried long ago. And the more you try to love them, the more they twist, because love reveals. Love sees too much, and what they cannot bear is to be seen beyond the persona, into the raw, forgotten self that still waits behind all that goodness. Jung understood this not with judgment, but with sorrow, because underneath every projection is pain. Underneath every mask is memory. Underneath every inflated ego is a child who was never allowed to be ordinary, and the child became a saint to survive. But sainthood is a cold home. Perfection is a lonely country, and eventually, even the most polished persona begins to crack. Sometimes it happens slowly, through illness, through heartbreak, through exhaustion. Sometimes it comes suddenly, a collapse, a breakdown, a moment of piercing self-awareness when the mirror finally refuses to lie. And in that moment, if they are willing, something new begins, something terrifying, something beautiful. The real self stirs, afraid, awkward, unpolished, but alive, and for the first time in years, they do not speak from the role. They speak from the wound, from the shadow, from the part of themselves they buried in the name of survival. And what emerges is not a performance. It is presence. It is honesty. It is the tremble in the voice that says, "I don't know who I am anymore." And that trembling, is the most sacred sound in the human psyche, because it is not the sound of collapse. It is the sound of return. When a person finally returns to themselves, it is not with grand gestures or declarations of transformation. It is often quiet, almost imperceptible. They begin to pause before speaking. They begin to listen, not to respond, but to feel. They begin to question their certainty, not with shame, but with wonder. They notice when they're reacting, when they're projecting, when they're slipping into the old mask again. And instead of gripping it tighter, they let it slide. Just a little. Just enough for breath to pass through. Carl Jung never promised us enlightenment. He offered us something far more courageous: integration. The act of bringing together what we've scattered, reclaiming what we've rejected, facing what we fled from our entire lives. It is not glorious. It is not fast, but it is real. And the person who does this work, not once, but every day, begins to change in ways the world may not notice, but the soul does. They no longer need to be seen as good. They simply strive to be whole. They don't search for enemies in discomfort. They ask, "What is this teaching me about myself?" They don't turn pain into blame. They sit with it. They trace its shape. They learn its origin. And they breathe through it, slowly. They do not demand that others carry what they themselves have disowned. They carry it, imperfectly, gently, and that carrying becomes a kind of presence the world desperately needs. The integrated person is not above you. They are beside you. They do not preach, they share. They do not perform clarity, they embody complexity. They can say, "Yes, I am afraid sometimes. I get angry. I still carry wounds I'm learning to name, but I am here, and I will not project them onto you." And in that confession, you feel something open in your own chest, because in their willingness to be human, they give you permission to be human too. That is the opposite of danger. That is healing. But the journey to get there is hard, lonely, repetitive, often thankless. You will catch yourself wearing the mask again. You will notice yourself slipping into old patterns, blaming, avoiding, pretending. That's okay. What matters is that now you notice. That's the shift. That's the work. Jung called this shadow work, not because the shadow is bad, but because it has been hidden. And when we bring the hidden into the light, not to destroy it but to understand it, we reclaim our power from the unconscious. We begin to walk differently in the world, not with dominance, with presence, not with certainty, with curiosity, not with armor, with openness. And suddenly, the need to control others fades. The need to be seen as right dissolves. The fear of our own imperfection begins to soften. We become less performative, more reflective, Less sharp, more still. We begin to feel things we haven't let ourselves feel in years. Grief, awe, regret, gratitude. And strangely, we stop needing everyone else to change, because we have finally begun to change. Not in the eyes of others, but in the silence of the self, and that silence is no longer hollow. It hums, with aliveness, with warmth, with depth. This is what Jung meant when he said, "I would rather be whole than good." To be whole is to know your capacity for all of it. The rage, the jealousy, the tenderness, the brilliance, the desire to run, the courage to stay. To hold those contradictions without shame. To look into the mirror, not of your bathroom, but of your relationships, your triggers, your loneliness, and say, "I see it now. I see me," and to not flinch. That is integration, and that is the only thing that keeps us from becoming dangerous. Because what we have met in ourselves, we no longer fear in others. What we have held with compassion, we no longer attack in the world. And what we have understood in the quietest parts of our being, we no longer need to shout over. The world does not need more perfect people. It needs more present ones, more real ones, more willing ones, and you are capable of that. Even now, especially now, because the fact that you're still here, listening, feeling, tells me you're already doing the work. You don't need to become someone else. You need to return to who you were before you thought you had to be someone else. That self, the quiet, trembling, unarmored self, is still in there, not waiting to be saved, just waiting to be seen by you. And when you see them, not with judgment, but with presence, you will understand why Jung called this the sacred task of the second half of life. To integrate, to become whole, to stop fleeing from the shadow and start walking with it, not behind you, beside you. Because it was never the enemy. It was always the part of you that loved you enough to wait, in the dark, until you were ready to come home.